This is so big. It's so huge. 2020 can be the year that our world turned the corner and our nation turned the corner on racism.
Hello and welcome to Comms Life from APCO Worldwide. I'm your host, Tom Billinghurst. Every episode, we delve into the topics and trends shaping the communications industry. In this episode, we're looking at the role of corporate America in elevating the dialogue around Black History Month in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. APCO Worldwide's theme for Black History Month in 2021 is Change Agents. We're looking at the emerging leaders proactively changing the way America is and is perceived, from representation to leadership and power dynamics. Joining us to discuss these topics, two of our colleagues from the United States. Charlene Wheeless, Senior Advisor for Equity and Justice at APCO, and Licy Do Canto, the recently appointed Managing Director for APCO's Washington, D.C. office. Charlene, Licy, welcome to the show.
Oh, great. Thank you for having us here. I'm sure this will be the most fun we have all day.
Great to be here with Charlene and to talk about this just incredibly important and timely issue facing our globe and facing all of us here in the United States.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning stateside. Perhaps as introductions, I could get you to surmise what have led you both into your current positions with APCO. Charlene, for you, that's as Senior Advisor for Equity and Justice at APCO. So what was the journey like to get to this point for you, and how did you come to be in communications?
Well, I'm one of those people that was fortunate enough to know what I wanted to do with my life at the very beginning. And when I started at university, I thought I would be a teacher. And then I realized that that might not be economically feasible. So my first year, in an effort to be in a big hurry to get my electives out of the way, I took a journalism PR course, and it was love at first letter. So once I took that course, I said I'm going to be a communicator for my profession, and I've never looked back. And so I've been on the corporate side for a little over 30 years, in the C-suite for a little over 20. And then I walked away from all of that about a year ago and wrote a book, and then decided that I would start a communications consulting firm in the fall. But last summer is when George Floyd was killed, and we all watched his murder. And, my business pretty much started me. Then I immediately started getting calls from people that I knew and leaders of companies asking, hey, what should I be doing right now? And my answer was always the same, which was, I think that systemic racism, bias, and injustice is the issue. So I would talk to potential clients and say, if you want to talk about, systemic racism and bias in your workplace, I'm your girl, and we'll have a great conversation, and I can help you. But it was very clear to me what the world needs from us as communicators right now, and it's about changing the world, quite frankly. And Marjorie asked me if I was interested in coming to APCO. As a senior advisor for equity and justice. And I said, absolutely. If this can be another platform to move things forward, I am all in. And that's how I got here.
Fantastic. But from teaching to learning, Licy, I imagine you're doing a lot of learning the ropes of APCO, having just joined. I think we're about a month into your tenure as Managing Director for the Washington, D.C. office. So how have you ended up here?
Well, that's right. It's been a month, although it's felt like a year, but a terrific year indeed. But it really begins to sort of how I ended up where I am today starts at the very beginning. I think, like for all of us, my parents are immigrants from West Africa, and they came to the United States in the late 1960s. And I grew up in the 70s and 80s in a time in Boston of great turmoil and a lot of tension, very similar, if not perhaps in some ways a little worse than what we're facing now in terms of tensions around racial and inequality and justice. So I grew up, if you will, making diversity, equity, and inclusion my constant companions in everything that I did. And I found my way to the halls of Congress, working for two of the most powerful leaders, I think, in this country, Senator Ted Kennedy and Congressman Barney Frank. And I took that, what I learned, which was sort of in the Academy of Congress, and how to be working with people from all sides and all points of view, even if you disagreed with them, and carry that forward into what I called leaning in with purpose and driving with impact in my work in public health and my work in many other industries. And that led me to last year, like it did with all of us, in which I think what we saw and those impacted by the virus, by the pandemic, by what we all saw, and for some of us suddenly were reawakened in the tragic murder of George Floyd and the tragic events before and after, is that communities of color, disadvantaged and underserved communities were disproportionately impacted, and they continue to be. And so for me, finding my way, if you will, to the APCO table was one in which I knew it is a table that I wanted to be at. It's like what Thomas Paine says, time finds us all. What time found me at the right moment, at the right place, at the right table, to lean in and do the work that Charlene and I are doing in the terrific group of leaders in Washington, D.C. This is our time. And so that's why I'm excited to be sitting here together with Charlene at this APCO table, doing the work that we are doing.
Wonderful. Now, for both of you, politics and social justice and equality, as you've just explained and contextualized there, are at the core of your careers. Along that line of thinking, APCO's theme for Black History Month this year is change agents. So Licy, I wonder if I could come to you here and ask you to outline what that means essentially. What is APCO doing to ensure that this conversation is taken to the places that it needs to be taken to?
Well, I think it's important, again, to start at the beginning. Founded in 1984 by Marjorie Cross. We are a woman-led company, and I think with that, we've leaned into women empowerment and helping communities, not just women, but also diverse communities as well, throughout our entire legacy. So for us, the legacy of diversity, equity, inclusion starts long ago through the leadership that Marjorie and so many others have brought along the way. That's helped to shape and inform the work that we do, both in asking those who come and join us to sign what we call a diversity accord, leaning into their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I would also add that we spent a lot of time, Charlene, myself, other leaders up and down the company, engaging within the community, in the places that we sit and the opportunities that we engage in order to continue to express ourselves through thought leadership and in other ways, and to ensure that what we're doing internally around the APCO table continues into the communities. And again, we drive with impact and purpose in all that we do.
Springboarding from that topic then, Charlene, and coming to you, this idea of empowering communities. I wonder what you make of the modern communicator's role in championing these acts and messages of inclusivity, social justice, particularly when it comes to the narrative of Black History Month. Do you think agencies have a moral imperative to get clients to engage more on this topic?
I think everyone individual has a moral imperative to have the conversation and the discussion and the education. But APCO is unique in the way that we are approaching this, and that we are willing to have the conversations and to push a little bit. And I have to say, having spent my entire career at corporate, I was quite surprised when I came into APCO, that the company, that the firm was leaning in as much as it is. In leaving corporate America, I have found my voice, a new voice, and I don't want to be silenced. And Marjorie said, "Oh no, I've read your stuff, and it's fine. As a matter of fact, I encourage you to do it." And I don't think that there are a lot of firms that would have said that. But the moral responsibility is individual. And I feel quite strongly that we all have a responsibility, because, just being quite honest, it is not fun being a Black American female in corporate America, right? Period. I mean, there are a lot of other easier ways to go. So if we can make things better, then by all means we should.
Charlene, I'm just going to stick with you there as well, because you said, your experience of corporate America and communications has been an almost systemic, symbolic or symptomatic, certainly running through the corporate world, a systemic racism issue. How do you get what is happening there across to those who don't see it but need to see it?
That's quite difficult. And I think it is one person at a time, and it's through relationships. I think that prior to the summer, when everything just blew up, right? We had I call it the tridemic, right? Because we had the health pandemic, the economic pandemic, the racial and social justice pandemic. Prior to that, people who weren't impacted by not having privilege could go blindly along and pretend that there was no such thing. And, to Lisa's point, where he said that our time is now, truer words have never been spoken, because people are paying attention. And for the first time, people who aren't Black and brown also care about this issue. And I can say, thus far in my lifetime, and certainly as an adult, I have not seen that. And when I looked at the television, and I watched the Black Lives Matter protest, and I saw a rainbow of skin tones of people who said enough is enough. To me, that opened the door to then start to have those uncomfortable conversations in the workplace, and to make people see what they didn't see before.
So, Licy, I'm just going to come back to you on this point then. These narratives that Charlene is talking about, what do you think needs to change? What do we need to see happening in the corporate world to see these experiences recognized and enacted?
Well, first, Charlene so elegantly described the circumstance that we all face. And so for many of us, we've been facing for long before 2020 and 2021. And the question now for corporations and the leaders who guide them, and for companies from one end of the globe to the other, is what are you going to stand for? What we all saw in 2020 was that inequality was not just about individuals, it was about companies too. And what 2020 and 2021 are showing us is that what these crises have done is force companies to have to rethink, rewrite, and rebalance that relationship that they have with their employees, with their stakeholders, and with the communities in which they engage in. And when this pandemic moves into some phase where we might consider sort of post-pandemic, the question really is going to be, what did you do when the pandemic struck this country, this globe, as a community, as a leader, as a company? And so the corporate leader now is moving from CEO to ally to social activist, and having to balance that with regard to also the company that they're moving forward, and do that at a time that we are all living out loud in constant ambiguity and constant uncertainty. And for many of us, we've been living in that way long before 2020. And so the obligation is, what are you going to do? And that's not only what we have to face individually, but also at the corporate and leadership level as well.
So I'm going to come to you, Charlene, and pick up on something that Licy said to kind of round off this section here. We're talking about agents of change, APCO's theme for the Black History Month, in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I want to get your take here on two questions. What was it about the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent Black Lives Matter movement that changed the way people thought about systemic racism and what was happening around them? Was it the rhetoric? Was it the fact that it was captured on so many cameras and it was on the news and it was almost inescapable because of the social media presence across the world? That's the first question I want to ask you, and it's dovetailed with the next question. Is that in that context of APCO's theme of agents of change, who for you embodies this idea of agents of change in the modern world? Who embodies that ethos?
Okay. So starting with, with this past summer, with our summer, with George Floyd and the murder, I mean, watching that on television or on your computer screen, it was inescapable. And if you're human, it is impossible to see that and not feel something. And I think that when you feel something, it becomes real. And when you see that kind of injustice, then you have to act. This is such a moment of humanity and compassion and empathy and courage for our company leaders. And it's interesting because there are people love to say that that the system is broken, right? The system is not broken. The system works exactly as it was intended, right? To privilege one group and to disenfranchise another group. And so I think with CEOs, it's CEOs have to have the courage to not say, I'm going to fix our systems, but to say, I'm going to dismantle our systems and rebuild them through a lens of equity and justice. And the second part of your question, who do I kind of think embody some of the behaviors of the change, being agents of change? I have to tip my hat to the broad group of Gen Zers and the generation behind them, because they are agents of change and they don't even know it. It's just who and how they are. And I have so much confidence and optimism about this next generation, because they're just not going to say, oh, that's the way it is, right? They're going to say, no, that's not the way it is. We're changing it because it's not right. Right. And we all brought them up to fight on principle. And that's something that needs to happen now, in my opinion.
Thomas, I would say, I would pick up on what Charlene just said to answer your question. They're the new leaders, the new navigators of the so-called next normal, if you will. And that next normal, in my view, is that tomorrow has to look different than today. And they are the ones that are leading us in that courageous and confident and using all the tools and instruments of the 21st century to help make that change. I will say to you that one of the things that I've been thinking about as of last year is there's this old South African proverb that says, when you pray, you need to move your feet. So many companies and so many leaders preaching and praying long before 2020 about diversity, equity, inclusion. And when it came time to move their feet, they didn't. And there are those who are. And so that's what we need to move to, is not the preaching and praying. That time is done. It is time to move your feet and act and lean in and embrace what this era is providing, to unlearn the stale patterns, to confront the limited narratives, and to really embrace the we that is at the center of diversity, equity, inclusion. And that's why I think I say very unapologetically, the time is now. The time is now to embrace the opportunity that we have. And what I so admired about the movement, if you will, and what gives me inspiration, hope, is that for any successful movement in our country, it has to be made up of multiple communities, multiple races, as well as multiple generations.
Thanks for tuning into Comms Life by APCO Worldwide. If you're enjoying this, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us wherever you get your podcasts from. Catch up on all our previous episodes, where we discuss everything from the future of aviation with Arabian Aerospace to the global economic recovery with The Economist.
Welcome back to Comms Life. We are still here with Charlene Wheeless, Senior Advisor for Equity and Justice at APCO Worldwide, and Licy Do Canto, Managing Director for APCO's Washington, D.C. office. For the second segment of the show, we're looking at a recent and relevant topic in the news. For this episode, we're deviating ever so slightly from the usual script to, instead of looking at a news item, look at a poem that's been making news since it was performed. I'm, of course, referring to The Hill We Climb by the precocious talent of Amanda Gorman, the spoken word poem she wrote and delivered at President Biden's inauguration on 20th of January this year. It's not every day that poetry is making headlines, so we have to take the opportunity when it presents itself. Charlene, Licy, I know you're both familiar with the poem, and if anyone that's listening or watching to this hasn't yet read it or seen it, please do. It's essential watching and reading. There are 6 lines in particular from the poem that I want to draw your attention to and get your thoughts on. And I will do my best to do justice to Amanda's work. It goes, "When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice." Beautiful writing. So firstly, Charlene, I wonder if you could talk about why these lines from this poem at this moment in time are so striking in the context and history of the Black American experience and this constant striving for equality and justice in America.
Yeah, I think that, well, one, of course, Ms. Gorman is absolutely amazing. And at 22, I know what I was doing at 22, and it wasn't anything like what she's doing, and which I think builds on to the point that Licy and I were making in the earlier segment about this younger generation. I think with her poem, although it is ultimately filled with hope and optimism, those first 6 lines really speak to the burden that Black people have carried with them every day, have had to carry with them and still carry. And I think it speaks to the restlessness and the frustration that comes with that burden, but also the need for perseverance. Right. And I think, one of the reasons I loved her poem so much, aside from it just being such a beautiful piece of artwork and a beautiful piece of communication, is that, she does recognize the struggle, but in the end, her poem is really just full of hope and optimism at the same time. And it was just beautiful to watch.
It absolutely was. So Licy, coming to you on this point, where we're speaking about agents of change, APCO's theme for Black History Month, taking that concept alongside this poem, for you, just how powerful is the rhetoric from Amanda Gorman, and how does it speak to the role that corporate America must take on in designing change and supporting policies and initiatives that drive greater equity?
Well, I think Amanda's poem is going to be what we remember 20, 30, 40 years from now, because she spoke to the generation that came before us and the generations that come after us. And one of the things I love so much about her poem, as you mentioned in this few sentences, is that she talks about the light. And another part of her poem, she talks about that there is a light if we're willing to be the light and to embrace that light. And I think for corporate America or organizations in any other sector, what we know is that what light do you want to shine on the challenges that now confront us all, those that are far too big on a global level for any one sector to address, whether it's the private sector or it's government. That is, we have to find that way to work together and collaborate on the very challenges that we all confront, because the alternative doesn't look too good. And I think one thing among others that we can take away from 2020 is that you don't have to be in corporate America in order to have a radically disruptive and long-lasting impact on it. I can't think of anyone who's had more impact on corporate America today in the 21st century than George Floyd, who had nothing to do with corporate America. And we are here in corporate America, and the corporate world has been forever changed in so many ways because of his legacy, and what we all have done, as Amanda has called us to, in order to see the light and to be the light and to carry the light forward. That's what corporations, leaders, communities, others need to embrace, is what role are they going to play? What role do they need to play in the world that we now live in, that's not temporary, but is permanent?
Absolutely. So a question for both of you here, and perhaps if I can come to you first on this one, Charlene. The hill we climb, as you point out, captures a sentiment of optimism through struggle. It's a very pertinent point of it. But if we bring this back to communicators and their day-to-day roles and responsibilities, is that how you think communicators should be going into this new dawn with this message? What lessons and principles and morals should we be drawing from this rhetoric as we go about being agents of change in our day-to-day roles and work?
Yeah, I think that for communicators, we are just perfectly positioned to in our corporations to see both sides, the leadership and what they're going through or thinking or not thinking, and also the rank and file. And we can be that bridge. And so I think as communicators, we should be more excited than we have ever been about our ability to make change within corporations and the world around us. And I just really hope that all communicators and CCOs siege this opportunity, because this is so big and it's so huge, right? And 2020 can be the year that our world turned the corner and our nation turned the corner on racism. And communicators can be leaders in that, because people are looking to businesses to make these changes. And I just hope that that communicators will develop their own courage to say what needs to be said if it isn't being said. Right, to be the truth seekers and the truth tellers that we are hired to be.
That's right.
And
That's
I'll
right.
toss it to you, Licy.
Well, it is changed. That's the role of the communicator that we've always played and continue to play. And ours is a critical seat at the table, not just before, but especially now. Diversity in communications and public relations has never been more important for companies as we oversee and help to guide the strategic direction and reputational risk oftentimes for companies. And so the voice that we carry alongside other leaders within companies is a critical one. There are not too many more important positions within the corporate leadership, if you will, than the role that the communicator plays. And that's not just in the actual function of that communications professional, but let's remember all of those who are leading companies are communicators and have an obligation to communicate in the work that they're doing. And as we see, some leaders have mistakenly believed that communication is only up to those who are formally in charge with that title, only to learn that their own comments have caused them great heartache and have led to some serious questions around their own kitchen table in terms of the kind of language and work that they're doing.
We hope you're enjoying this APCO Worldwide production. To find out more about what we do in the communication space, head to apcoworldwide.com and see how we are helping firms build back stronger.
Welcome back to Comms Life. We're still here with Charlene Wheeless and Licy Do Canto. For the last segment of the show, we want to get to know you both a little bit better on a personal level. So we've got some getting to know you questions. If you're both ready for these, I will fire them across. And maybe if we go Charlene first and then Licy. Earliest childhood memory.
My first dog, standard poodle, his name was Pierre.
Licy.
Wonderful. 4 years old, walking on a stone wall with my dad in his hometown on the Cape Verde Islands, and I fell off. And my dad said, "Get back up," and I fell off again. I still have those bruises on my knee some 3-4 decades later. But an important lesson: hold down, get back up.
Absolutely. Okay, second question, personal indulgence. Is it a cupcake or a donut, Charlene?
Well, it's both. A donut in the morning and a cupcake at night. I don't see why that has to be mutually exclusive.
I'm a kid from Boston, so it's always time to make the donuts. I have to go with my Dunkin' Donuts.
Great answers. Next, podcasts or audiobooks, Charlene?
Podcasts, hands down.
Yeah, I have to agree. Podcast. I'm old school. I need to hold my book in my hand and flip through the pages in real time.
I'm with you both on that one. Your perfect escape, Charlene?
Beach, but really resort pool with someone bringing me drinks at my leisure. And at any moment. That would be my perfect escape. And if I can't have that, a good book. Someday soon it'll be a reality again. Licy. Right.
Boy, another tough one, because I love all of those things and enjoy them all. What I love the most really are two things, if I can cheat a little bit here. One is just getting out, walking, and just breathing the fresh air in the neighborhood with my wife. But the second one, I have to tell you, sort of like an indulgence, is really just pulling up on the couch, watching Netflix, and catching up on the latest series of Cobra Kai.
Nice. Great plug, both for Netflix and for Cobra Kai. Love it. Next question. Role model who you have either met or would love to meet, Charlene?
Wow. Well, there's two. One would be Maya Angelou. I would have loved to have met Maya Angelou, and also Barack Obama. I would really like to sit down and have a cup of coffee with him now.
I love the fact that you've tied the poetry of what we've already discussed and the politics of what we've been discussing. That was brilliant. Licy.
That's the communicator in Charlene, always tying it together. Well, two things. My parents who immigrated in the 1960s, I don't know if I could have picked up with so little and moved to another country far into my own and start a life and raise 3 kids that have fantastically annoyed them for the rest of their life. But that's my parents. But out in life, if you will, the late John Lewis, who was also a close friend of mine, I can't think of any better person, leader who represents that hindsight and the foresight that we see in today's society than John and what he stood for. And for me personally, it's someone who represents sort of the better part of the 30 years that I've been doing this work, which I really call in his name, the Academy of Good and Necessary Trouble. That's what my life experience is. And John is was an amazing and continues to be an amazing legacy for all of us in this and so many other areas of our life.
Fabulous stuff. Charlene, Licy, thanks so much for joining us on Comms Life.
Thank you for having us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Comms Life. If you liked that, leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Send us any questions or comments on our Twitter page. And while you're at it, you can subscribe to and download Comms Life on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts from. Stay safe and be well.